Picture this: Monaco, 1992. A princess, granddaughter of Hollywood royalty Grace Kelly, stands before the world's cameras, her hand resting on a belly that holds a secret powerful enough to shake a 1,000-year-old throne. No wedding ring, no husband, just her, a divorced bodyguard, and a scandal so explosive it would make the Vatican tremble. This is the story of how Princess Stéphanie of Monaco chose love over legacy, and in doing so became the most talked-about royal rebel of the 20th century. The Mediterranean sun hangs heavy over Monte Carlo on a spring morning in 1992, casting golden shadows across the pink marble facades of the prince's palace. Inside those ancient walls, a storm is brewing, one that will transform a fairy tale into front-page tabloid fodder and challenge everything the world thought it knew about modern royalty. But to understand how we got here, to truly grasp the magnitude of what's about to unfold, we need to rewind the clock and step into a world where crowns still carry weight and bloodlines determine destiny. Monaco. The name alone conjures images of luxury yachts, Formula One racing, and impossibly elegant people sipping champagne on sun-drenched terraces. It's the second smallest country in the world, a glittering jewel barely bigger than New York's Central Park, wedged between the French Riviera and the shimmering Mediterranean. But don't let its size fool you. This tiny principality has been ruled by the Grimaldi family since 1297. That's over 7 centuries of unbroken dynastic power, through wars, revolutions, and the collapse of empires all around them. The Grimaldis survived by being careful, calculated, and above all, respectable. They understood something fundamental: when you're that small, reputation is everything. Then came Grace Kelly, 1956, a Hollywood goddess at the peak of her fame, elegant, ethereal, the kind of beauty that made strong men forget how to speak, abandons her film career to marry Prince Rainier III of Monaco. It's the wedding of the century, a real-life Cinderella story that transforms this sleepy tax haven into the glamour capital of Europe. Grace brings star power, American charm, and a level of international attention Monaco had never experienced. She's perfect, poised, dutiful, the embodiment of regal grace. She gives Rainier 3 children, Caroline, Albert, and Stephanie. For decades, the world watches this family with fascination, seeing in them something we all secretly crave: a life where fairy tales come true. But here's what they don't tell you about fairy tales. They don't mention the pressure, the suffocating weight of expectation that crushes everything spontaneous, everything human, everything real. They don't talk about what happens when you're born into a story someone else has already written, where every chapter of your life is predetermined, every scene choreographed, every line you're supposed to speak already printed in some invisible script. Stephanie Marie Elizabeth Grimaldi enters this world on February 1st, 1965. The baby of the family, the unexpected third child, arriving 5 years after her brother Albert. From the moment she takes her first breath, she's different. While her older sister Caroline masters the art of royal composure, learning to smile for cameras and shake hands with presidents before she's old enough to read, Stephanie is wild energy in a princess dress. She's the kid climbing trees in her Sunday best, the teenager sneaking out to nightclubs, the young woman who looks at the palace walls not as protection but as a prison. Her mother sees it, this restless spirit, and there's something in Grace's eyes, a flicker of recognition, perhaps even envy. Because Grace, too, had given up a world of freedom for these gilded cages. She'd traded the director's chair and the movie set's creative chaos for state dinners and ribbon-cutting ceremonies. She loved her family, loved Rainier, but sometimes, late at night, did she wonder what roles she might have played, what Oscars she might have won, what person she might have become. September 13th, 1982. The date that changes everything. Grace and Stephanie are driving together along the winding cliff roads above Monaco, that treacherous stretch of highway where the mountains plunge dramatically into the sea. The exact details of what happens next have been debated, dissected, and disputed for decades, but the result is tragically clear. The car veers off the road, tumbles down a mountainside, and crashes in a brutal collision that will alter the course of Stephanie's life forever. Grace Kelly, Princess of Monaco, Hollywood legend, beloved mother, dies the following day from her injuries. She's only 52 years old. Stephanie survives. Physically, she recovers, but emotionally, that's a different story. She's 17 years old, trapped in the back of that car, watching helplessly as her mother loses control, feeling the vehicle leave the road, the weightless terror of falling, the violent impact that shatters glass and bone and any remaining illusions of safety. For years afterward, cruel rumors will circulate that Stephanie was actually driving, that she caused the accident, that the royal family covered it up. None of it's true, but the whispers follow her like ghosts, adding guilt to her grief, suspicion to her suffering. In the years that follow, Stephanie does what many young people do when trying to outrun pain. She runs wild. Fashion model, singer, swimsuit designer. She releases pop albums that make music critics cringe but sell surprisingly well. She dates race car drivers, musicians, actors, always choosing men who represent everything the palace isn't: dangerous, unpredictable, free. The tabloids eat it up, christening her the wild child of Monaco, the rebel princess, Europe's most scandalous royal. She parties at Club 55 in Saint-Tropez. She's photographed in revealing outfits that make the palace press office work overtime. She poses for magazine covers that wouldn't look out of place at a newsstand in Times Square. The Monégasque establishment is horrified. This isn't how princesses behave. This isn't how Grace's daughter should act. But Stephanie isn't trying to be Grace. She's trying to be anyone but Grace, anything other than the perfect porcelain doll everyone expects her to be. She's screaming her independence in the only language she knows: rebellion. And then she meets Daniel Duckroot. Now, Daniel isn't a prince or a movie star or a millionaire playboy. He's a bodyguard, specifically, a member of the security detail assigned to protect the royal family. He's handsome in a rugged, working-class way, athletic build, dark eyes, the kind of guy who looks equally comfortable in a tuxedo or tactical gear. He's also divorced with a son, which in the early 90s Monaco establishment might as well be wearing a scarlet letter. He's precisely the kind of man a princess isn't supposed to notice, let alone fall for. But Stephanie does. Hard, there's something intoxicating about it. The forbidden nature, the class divide, the delicious scandal of it all. When you've spent your entire life being told who you should be, who you should love, what you should want, there's a particular thrill in choosing the exact opposite. Daniel represents normalcy, authenticity, a life without crowns and protocol and constant judgment. He doesn't care about her title. He knew her mother as a person, not a legend. He treats her like Stephanie, not Princess Stephanie, and that distinction, that simple, profound difference, feels like oxygen after a lifetime of suffocation. They try to keep it secret at first. Stolen moments, hidden encounters. But in a palace where everyone watches everyone, where servants report to senior staff who report to the prince, secrets don't stay secret long. The relationship becomes an open whisper, the kind of thing everyone knows but nobody discusses directly. Prince Rainier, her father, disapproves. Deeply. A bodyguard, a divorced father. This isn't just inappropriate, it's unthinkable. But Stephanie, true to form, doesn't care about appropriate. She never has. And then, in early 1992, she discovers she's pregnant. Imagine that moment. The test confirming what she already suspects. The mixture of joy and terror flooding through her. Because this isn't just any pregnancy. This is a royal pregnancy, conceived outside marriage, with a man the establishment has already written off as unsuitable. In modern 21st century terms, this might seem almost quaint, barely worth a raised eyebrow. But we're talking about 1992, and we're talking about Monaco, a principality where the Catholic Church holds enormous influence, where tradition isn't just respected but worshipped, where the royal family's legitimacy rests partly on their moral authority. Stephanie faces an impossible choice: hide it and live a lie, or announce it and face the consequences. In typical Stephanie fashion, she chooses confrontation over concealment. The announcement sends shockwaves through Monaco like an earthquake through crystal. An unmarried princess, pregnant by a bodyguard. The headlines write themselves. The tabloids go into overdrive. British newspapers run breathless exposés. French magazines publish timeline speculations. American talk shows dedicate entire segments to dissecting the scandal. The phrase, "out of wedlock," appears in print so frequently it becomes almost mundane. But behind that clinical language is centuries of stigma, judgment, and shame designed specifically to control women's bodies and choices. The Catholic Church in Monaco is predictably appalled. Priests deliver sermons about morality and duty without naming names, but everyone knows who they're discussing. Conservative Monegasque citizens, particularly older generations who remember Grace's elegance and propriety, feel personally betrayed. This isn't what a princess does. This isn't how the story is supposed to go. Some call for her to be removed from the line of succession. Others suggest she should be exiled, sent away until the scandal fades. But here's what makes Stephanie's story different from so many royal scandals before and since. She doesn't apologize. She doesn't hide. She doesn't perform the expected ritual of shame and redemption. Instead, she appears in public with her head high and her pregnancy visible, essentially daring anyone to criticize her to her face. There's something almost punk rock about it, this refusal to play the repentant sinner. She's saying, without words, "This is my life, my body, my choice. You can either accept it or don't. I'm doing this regardless." Prince Rainier, caught between his love for his daughter and his duty to the principality, maintains a public silence that speaks volumes. He doesn't disown her, but he doesn't defend her either. It's a painful middle ground, and you can almost feel his internal conflict. The father who wants to support his child versus the sovereign who must uphold standards. Caroline, her older sister, provides quiet support while managing her own complicated life. Albert, the heir, stays diplomatically neutral, already learning the careful politics he'll need when he eventually takes the throne. The international media coverage is relentless and often cruel. Stephanie is compared unfavorably to Diana, Princess of Wales, who at this exact moment is navigating her own marital difficulties with Prince Charles, but doing so with the appropriate level of discretion and dignity. Stephanie becomes the cautionary tale, the example of what happens when royals reject tradition too completely. Fashion magazines that once celebrated her now tusk about poor choices and losing her way. Pop psychologists appear on television to diagnose her from a distance, attributing her behavior to unresolved trauma from her mother's death, daddy issues, or simple immaturity. What almost none of these commentators acknowledge is the courage it takes to choose authenticity over approval when you've been raised in a system specifically designed to prioritize approval over everything else. Stephanie isn't just rebelling against her father or the palace or Monaco society. She's rebelling against the fundamental fairy tale that gave her family its power, the story that says royal women should be beautiful, silent, dutiful, and above all, perfect. She's saying that story is a lie, and she's willing to become the villain in someone else's narrative to live truthfully in her own. On May 8, 1992, Stephanie gives birth to a son, Louis Robert Paul Ducroux. No royal titles, no palace announcement, just a baby boy born to a mother who loves him and a father who adores him, existing outside the traditional structures that have defined Monaco royalty for centuries. It's both revolutionary and deeply, profoundly ordinary, which is perhaps the point. The following year, in a move that surprises exactly no one who's been paying attention, Stephanie and Daniel marry. It's not the grand cathedral wedding with television, coverage, and thousands of guests that Caroline had, or the state ceremony that will eventually mark Albert's marriage. It's a civil ceremony, relatively private, more about commitment than spectacle. Stéphanie wears a simple suit instead of a dramatic gown. There's no tiara, no trumpets. It's as close to normal as a princess wedding can possibly be. For a brief moment, it seems like maybe the fairy tale can be rewritten. Maybe Stéphanie has found her happy ending, just not the one anyone expected. She has a husband she loves, a beautiful son and a second child. A daughter named Pauline arrives in 1994. They look happy in photographs. This unconventional little family, playing on beaches and attending events together. Daniel's working-class ease mixing with Stéphanie's royal pedigree in ways that seem to work. But fairy tales, even rewritten ones, rarely stay happy forever. By 1996, the marriage is falling apart. The details are messy and public and humiliating in ways that make the original scandal look tame. Daniel is photographed in compromising positions with another woman, a setup he'll later claim, but the damage is done. Stéphanie, who'd fought so hard for this relationship, who'd weathered such incredible judgment to be with him, files for divorce. The very tabloids that condemned their union now celebrate its demise with barely concealed glee. See, they seem to say, "We told you it wouldn't work. We told you she should have married someone appropriate." Stéphanie could have retreated at this point, could have issued a statement about mistakes and lessons learned, performed the expected ritual of public penance, and slipped back into traditional royal life with her tail between her legs. But again, that's not who she is. Instead, she keeps living, keeps making choices that confuse and fascinate the public in equal measure. She has another relationship, another child, her third, with yet another man the establishment deems unsuitable. She joins the circus, literally performing with a traveling show, learning trapeze and living in a caravan. She continues designing swimwear, releasing music, appearing in fashion campaigns. Each choice reinforces her fundamental message. I am more than my title. I am more than my mother's legacy. I am more than your expectations. Looking back now, more than 3 decades after that shocking pregnancy announcement, Stéphanie's scandal feels almost quaint. In a world where royal family members casually appear on reality shows, where princes marry commoners without controversy, where the very concept of legitimate versus illegitimate children seems like a relic from another age, it's easy to forget how genuinely revolutionary Stéphanie's choices were in 1992. She was operating in a pre-internet age when traditional media still held enormous gatekeeping power, when the narrative about royal women was tightly controlled by palace press offices and established newspapers. She was navigating a cultural moment when single motherhood still carried significant stigma, when divorce was still somewhat scandalous, when marrying outside your class was still considered noteworthy. She was pushing against centuries of precedent in a country where tradition isn't just respected but economically necessary. Monaco's entire identity rests on its royal family's prestige. And she did it anyway. The deeper story here isn't really about pregnancy or bodyguards or tabloid scandals. It's about the fundamental conflict between individual autonomy and institutional expectation, between personal truth and public image, between the life you're supposed to live and the life you actually want. It's about the price women pay for choosing themselves, particularly women born into systems specifically designed to prevent such choices. Stéphanie paid that price. She was called wild, reckless, immature, selfish, a bad example, a disappointment. She watched relationships with family members strain under the weight of her choices. She endured years of negative press coverage, her every move scrutinized and criticized. She became the cautionary tale, the black sheep, the problematic princess. But she also got to live on her own terms. She got to choose her partners, raise her children the way she wanted, pursue careers that interested her, and exist as a full human being rather than a decorative symbol. She got to be complicated, messy, real, all the things princesses aren't supposed to be. Today, Stéphanie is in her late 50s, still living in Monaco, still occasionally appearing at royal functions but largely staying out of the spotlight. Her children are grown now, pursuing their own paths with remarkably little drama, perhaps because they learned from their mother that authenticity matters more than approval. Louis works in sports management. Pauline dives competitively and models. Her third child, Camille, is becoming a fashion designer. None of them carry royal titles, but all of them carry something arguably more valuable: the freedom to define themselves. The principality that once recoiled from Stéphanie's scandal has largely made peace with it. Monaco has modernized in many ways, become more accepting, less rigid. Prince Albert, now ruling, has his own complicated personal life that makes his sister's choices look positively conventional. The world has moved on, as it always does, finding new scandals to obsess over, new rebels to either celebrate or condemn. But Stéphanie's story endures because it represents something larger than itself. It's about what happens when the person cast as the princess decides she'd rather be the protagonist of her own story, even if that story doesn't end with happily ever after in the traditional sense. It's about the radical act of choosing authentic imperfection over performative perfection. It's about recognizing that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is disappoint people. That moment in 1992, a young woman standing before the world, unmarried and pregnant, refusing to apologize, that was more than a scandal. It was a declaration of independence, not from Monaco or her family or her royal duties, but from the suffocating narrative that said her life belonged to everyone except herself. And in the end, maybe that's the real fairy tale. Not the princess who finds the perfect prince and lives happily ever after, but the princess who decides that living truthfully, even imperfectly, even scandalously, is worth more than living perfectly false. The princess who chooses the messy, complicated, beautiful chaos of a real life over the pristine, controlled emptiness of a fairy tale. The princess who teaches us that sometimes the most royal thing you can do is be unapologetically, defiantly, courageously human. That's Princess Stéphanie of Monaco, not the scandal, the woman behind it, the rebel with a crown, the fairy tale that refused to be written by anyone else. And her story, controversial and complicated as it remains, whispers a truth that echoes far beyond palace walls. Your life belongs to you, not to tradition, not to expectation, not to anyone else's version of who you should be, just to you. And claiming that ownership, whatever the cost, is perhaps the bravest thing any of us can do, princess or not.